Welcome to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning, a place for meaningful conversations, real stories, and a shared mission to protect life.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. I'm very, very excited today. This is a very special episode, very close to my heart, and I have been waiting to share this with you guys. So I would like to welcome Hannah. Hannah, can you just tell everyone, just from your own words, a little bit about who you are and your background, and we'll dive more into your story. But I kind of want to just preface it with a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Hannah Strege. I'm a licensed social worker. And I just sat for my LCSW exam. So I'm almost officially an LCSW. I'm the first adopted frozen embryo in the world. My parents adopted me and my 19 siblings from my biological family, and I was the only one to survive the freeze, the thaw, and the transfer. And now I guess I consider myself an advocate for embryo adoption and the frozen orphans that are in freezers as we speak.
I love that. Well, anyone who knows me, if you guys are watching, you know that I'm obviously a big embryo adoption advocate. This is something that has been close to my heart. I've adopted embryos myself, and it's been an incredible process. So, before we kind of dive into your story, Hannah, I told you before we hit record that when we first started to kind of explore embryo adoption, the book that your father wrote really impacted our decision to do embryo adoption. And it was just about your family's journey. And it just brought so much hope into what I think can often be a very painful and uncertain area of life when you're dealing with things like infertility. And knowing that so many lives, including my own, have been touched by your story. I mean, I read your story years ago. What has it been like growing up and realizing that your life has become a source of hope for other people?
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing you say that. Like, thank you so much for saying that. I feel like I don't wake up in the morning and think like, "Oh my gosh, my life offered hope to people," because I don't get to hear the stories all the time unless I'm actually talking with people that have adopted frozen embryos, but it truly feels like unreal to know that so many babies have been born or given a chance to fill their gift of life just because my parents chose to adopt frozen embryos rather than choose off of the donation list. And so I think that's just such a beautiful thing, and it's certainly shaped my career and how I want to move forward in the world.
Absolutely. Well, let me reverse or rewind a little bit because there are probably people who are watching or listening that have no idea what the heck embryo adoption is. They're like, "What is that?" Just to give everyone a little bit of an explanation, I'll talk quickly about IVF, and then I'll kind of let you explain embryo adoption and just what it is. So obviously, if you're not familiar with IVF, you should be. But IVF is obviously when sperm and egg are taken and embryos are created in a lab, and then that embryo or embryos are then placed back into either the woman whose eggs were taken or into a surrogate, which is a whole other issue that we won't even get into on this episode. But then that the embryo is then put back into the womb, and then hopefully there's a positive pregnancy test, and then obviously the next 9 months happen. So the problem with IVF, though, and this is kind of where embryo adoption comes in, Hannah, and I'll have you share that, is it's a very expensive process. It's a very physically demanding process. And so when they take the eggs from a woman, they're taking a bunch of eggs and then they're taking a bunch of sperm and they're creating tons and tons and tons of embryos in order to try to get, maybe one or two kids. So we have this problem where there's all of these embryos that are being created through in vitro fertilization. And the question becomes, what do we do with them? And that kind of gets into the moral and ethical implications of how do we treat human life from the various earliest stages. And obviously, embryo adoption is one of, I think it is the most redeeming option when there are frozen embryos that are sitting, waiting to have something done with them. So can you tell a little bit about embryo adoption, that process, and what that is for people who may not know?
Yeah, so there are two different programs or ways people can go about adopting an embryo, but truly only one that means adoption. So sometimes when people say, "Oh, I adopted an embryo," they really mean a donor program. And a donor program is you can get embryos from an IVF clinic, you can get them from your doctor. Um, and really, that's just, hey, I want a child, and hey, we have all of these children already created. Just pick one off of this list. That is a donor program. And placing families can place their embryos for adoption. Usually, it's an anonymous donation. And so you don't know, or the child, if they're born, they don't know who their biological family is. And so it can be really hard on the child. If you're going through an embryo adoption program, usually there is a home study involved. And the home study really humanizes the embryo because it is a child. These are frozen children. Um, and both are saving a life. I just see that embryo adoption chooses to personify the embryo, where a lot of people choose to be like, oh, it's just an embryo, it's not a child. No, that is a human being. When the sperm and the egg come together and it's fertilized, it's a new child. And so I think embryo adoption just brings a lot of hope, and it's just an adoption model, because children aren't second best and they don't deserve to be treated like they are, or that they're spare parts, or they're unwanted. And when you hear a donation program, it sounds like you're donating your children to Goodwill, and that's not
Yeah.
what a child should feel like.
No, and spare parts is very much in my experience going through embryo adoption and the IVF industry itself. That's very much how these human beings are treated, as spare parts, as extras, as leftovers, things like
Mhm.
that. And so yeah, I love how embryo adoption humanizes. So if you're watching or listening and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, so you're talking about a couple who adopts embryos that are someone else's biological children, and then you put them inside of you, and then you give birth to a child." Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it sounds a little sci-fi, but it's very cool. It's a very, like I said, redemptive way to go about things. So just a little background for you guys. I would very much encourage everyone to look into embryo adoption. We did our embryo adoption through Snowflake's embryo adoption program, through Nightlight Christian Adoptions, and they have a lot of great resources, information. I think this is a very important subject to be very well versed on. So your back to your story, Hannah.
Yeah.
Um, your parents made history when they chose to adopt all of those frozen embryos. I mean, 19, that's a huge leap of faith. We adopted 15 the first time.
Wow.
But I think it was just so amazing. And to hear that you were just, they gave every single one of your siblings an opportunity to live. When did you, though, first begin to understand that your story was different from most people's, like how you came to be?
Yeah, I think, my mom taught me you were adopted as a seed and put into my mommy's tummy to grow. And that's how I would explain my story to literally everybody there was: doctors, kids in my class, teachers, what have you. And if they looked at me funny, I'd be like, well, you're the weird one because you don't understand. Like, this is just biology, and you don't understand that I was adopted as a seed and put into my mommy's tummy to grow. And people did not understand that, even healthcare professionals. And so I never really felt like the odd person out. My parents had me very involved in our adoption agency, where I would meet kids that were adopted from Russia, China, a domestic program, foster care. Adoption was normal for me. And if you weren't adopted, that was a little abnormal. So I think it really just depends on how it was, portrayed to you growing up. Um, but I think also when I was testifying before Congress when I was 2 and sitting on my mom and dad's lap, like, that wasn't a typical kindergartner's experience. When I went to see or stand behind President Bush while he gave his first veto, that was not a typical kindergartner experience.
Right.
And so I had a lot of interesting experiences at a young age, and my 2 truths and a lie will forever be kind of around that, being frozen for 2 years and meeting the president and all of that kind of stuff. And
You
so,
have the best icebreakers when you
yeah,
play
I
Two
have
Truths
really
and
good
a Lie.
icebreakers, and sometimes I don't want to get into it because I just don't have the mental capacity to explain biology to people. And I'm sure you've experienced that too, with just explaining going through embryo adoption or what you're doing to your friends and family. Um, and so, yeah, I just think that
Mhm.
I realized that was a little bit different when other kids weren't being interviewed or going to the White House and doing all those things too.
Yeah.
But it was always normal to me.
Well, can you talk a little bit? That was going to be kind of my next question. Can you talk about when you were, like you said, sitting on your mom's lap in front of Congress and meeting the president? Like, what were those about? Tell people, what yeah, what was the political climate? What was the reason? How that felt? Just dive right into that.
Yeah, if you read my dad's book, he really unpacks this really well because being 2 years old, I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't really know what was going on until we went to the White House when I was a kindergartner, and, we stood behind President Bush while he made his first veto against embryonic stem cell research, and that was really what was going on during the time of people wanting to use, the stem cells from embryos, to do research for different cures. And so that research ends a human life, whereas adult stem cell research has actually saved human lives. And so when we went to the White House and we stood behind President Bush for his first veto, that was against embryonic stem cell research, against killing children. And I very much stood by that. I very much understood, like, hey, this is not right. Even as a 7-year old, I was like, hey, wait, this is not what we should be doing. I think I was 6 or 7, but
Yeah.
it was it was powerful then and it's powerful now that just even a kid could pick up on, like, hey, they're murdering, like, kids like me that were once frozen, just to see if it would work, to see if it would save another life. It's like a
Mhm.
life for a life, basically,
Mhm.
and that's an easy concept for even a child to understand, like, "Hey, this is not okay."
Well, you would think that people would grasp basic biology. I mean, these are the thoughts that go through my head every day, all day. I'm like, why don't we just get this?
Yeah.
And I think it's very cool that you were so young and you were grasping this concept. And that obviously has shaped your beliefs moving forward. And I think it is important for people to understand that the reality that we face with embryos is you can't see them without a microscope. And so people tend to, I think, as a human race, we tend to dehumanize those that are different than us, that are smaller than us, that, people would look at you today and they'd say, oh, she's a full grown woman, she's a human being. Of course, her life matters, but it, it's conditional. Okay, well, now it matters because you're an adult and you're a human
Mhm.
being, but what about when you were in an embryo? And I think that's
Mhm.
kind of the big discussion. And like I said, I think that we live in a really dumb is I don't know if dumb is the right word. I
Yeah.
hesitate calling people dumb, but I think it's a pretty obvious thing that obviously these are human beings from the second that they're
Mhm.
created. And you were a human being. You were that tiny little embryo. We all were embryos at one point. And
Yeah.
given the opportunity and given the right environment and given time, this is what we become. So I think that's really, really powerful, a really powerful testimony, a really powerful thing that you are able to participate in something that, was affecting political change and change for so many other embryos across the nation. So I think that's really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we did talk about a little bit about when you were right behind George W. Bush, President Bush. What do you remember about that day? Can you tell me anything like that you remember about that time? And I mean, that's just a cool experience.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I mean, I was in kindergarten. I think I was 6, and I remember there's this fabulous picture, and I'm gonna have to post it onto X, I think, at some point, but I'm pouting behind President Bush. Like, I have chin in hands, elbows on knees, like, I was pissed because I wanted to go to the hotel pool, and here I am on this stage behind the president, and I'm like, "I could care less about this," and my mom is elbowing me, bribing me with a new American Girl doll that I wanted. And I sat up super straight. I was there and I understood why we were there. I just didn't understand why it had to go that long because to me, it was like everybody should understand why we're here. Like, this is wrong. Killing children is wrong. And why do I have to sit here and explain that to adults? Like, that part just really was a disconnect to me. But now, and as an adult, I feel the exact same way, arguing with grown people that don't understand any of this. And so I can really resonate with 6-year-old Hannah and really not understanding like why
Yeah.
this is so hard for people to grasp. But I
Yeah.
have to remember patience and just kind of going back to the basics. But
Oh, same girl. You're preaching to the choir because I'm the same way. I'm like, I'm a very impatient person and I'll just be like, why can't people understand this? And then the Holy Spirit's like, bro, calm down.
mhm,
you know
yeah.
but like any 6-year-old, I would probably would have wanted to be at the pool too. You just don't, sometimes you just don't even like grasp it. I mean, it's hard to when you're that young, but I think it's really
Mhm,
amazing that you did understand. And um I want to talk a little bit about to kind of bring it around to focus on the family. So the way that I initially heard about embryo adoption was that my mother-in-law, so this was 7 years, I don't know, it was a long time ago,
Okay.
and we had some infertility problems, and we were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to be able to have a family? And she had called us and said, hey, I heard a radio program with focus on the family, and they talked about snowflakes embryo adoption, like you guys should look into this. And we thought that that was obviously really amazing. And so your story though helped to inspire that first kind of formal frozen embryo adoption program. Is that correct? And it really caught the attention of Dr. James Dobson, who is the founder of Focus on the Family. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of partnership has affected just the path of embryo adoption today?
Yeah. So, I mean, Focus on the Family didn't pick up my story. My mom, like she still does today, just calls people up. And she called Focus on the Family one day and they put her through to they tried to get her through to Dr. Dobson, but not that day. But she just called up and was like, hey, I'm wanting to adopt embryos. I'm wanting to talk to him. And he called her back and she got right in and talked to him and asked him, like, hey, what do you think about adopting frozen embryos? And he's like, I don't really know even what to tell you. I have to go seek counsel. But he called her back and kind of gave his opinion. And shortly thereafter, around the same time, I wasn't there, so I don't really that's my mom's story to really tell, but my placing family had also called Focus on the Family around the same time and said, "Hey, we have 20 frozen embryos we'd like to place for adoption," and they didn't know where else to go because that wasn't a thing. And Focus kind of was like, "Hey, we know who the adoptive family will be for these children." And so they really just kind of brought us together because Focus on the Family at the time in the late 90s and even before that was just where Christian families went to seek advice on family issues. And so Dr. Dobson had us on broadcasts. We would go out to Colorado to visit him on occasion. We'd go to his house in Palm Desert, Palm Springs to record things when he was in town. But he asked to be my godfather. And so he was a huge part of my life and just really orchestrated the program along with other Christian pastors and individuals we knew that really just kind of was like, hey, yes, this is a problem. These embryos need to be adopted.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful. It really set the stage for, someone like me to be able to do that and to go through the program. And like you were talking about earlier, it's different than, embryo donation because this is a process where you do have a home study. It's not legally required, but the whole point is that we humanize the embryos. And so it's this beautiful program, you guys. We made a family profile and we sent it out, and people picked us and they said, we want you to adopt our embryos. And it was very humanizing, and it was just this whole process. And it's beautiful because you're giving them a chance. So I'm so glad that everything lined up so perfectly that way. And I think that that's just a testament to the Lord. I mean, there's no other way that something like that can happen. So I think that that is just really, really beautiful. And I know you had talked about how you are in social work, and I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that and how your unique entrance into the world has shaped your passion for, child welfare, family,
Mhm.
social issues.
Yeah, I mean, I originally thought I would go into nursing because I was like, I really need like a medical background to talk to people. And then I was like, that's really not where my passion is. I really do have a passion for actually talking and speaking and advocating for people. And what better way to do that than social work? And it just kind of hit me when I started going to college and I was like, these classes aren't for me. And then I transitioned into my major of social work and I started getting A's and excelling. And so it just really ended up being the perfect path for me and just really has given me a really great background to counsel people individually as a licensed professional, just to be able to talk about these things. Cause I do have people in my DMs quite frequently being like, hey, Hannah, I'm had this ethical issue. What do I do? And I was not a therapist at the time. I'm not licensed in every state, but people just wanted advice and they'd hear my story on the radio or a broadcast or they read an article and they'd really just want to talk to me. Um, and I'm like, I'm not a popular person. So they'd just find me on Instagram and um, I talked to them as best I could, but I really wanted that to kind of be my career, my niche, to be able to do that professionally. And so that's what I did. And here I am. And it's really been exciting. And I just opened up a nonprofit. It's called Wonderfully Made Adoption Services International.
Wow. Yep. I was
And
just about to
it's,
ask you about that. So that's perfect timing.
yes, it's in the very early stages. Like websites are just under construction, but um, the whole idea is for people that have gone through IVF or have embryos remaining or have adopted themselves in whatever program, if they're a birth mom, if they're a placing family, adoptee, just to have somebody to talk to and gain consulting services or really just talking to somebody that has been adopted. Because there's really no post adoption support. There's not even like really support for families that have maybe even adopted an embryo and it like fell through or they didn't get pregnant, or maybe the country that they were adopting from closed. They don't really have somebody to talk to about that, because adoption agencies are great in the moment and getting you your child, but at the end of the day, they don't offer much post adoption support. And I really wanted to create a place for that, no matter what adoption program or just people looking to talk to somebody. And so I'll also have like a counseling side. So the states that I'm actually licensed in, there'll be like a link to go to that too if you wanted individual counseling. But the main gist of it is consulting for the nonprofit piece.
That's amazing. Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, when you have that information, please share it with me because I'd like to share it. I mean, there's obviously a huge community of people in the pro-life movement in the Christian world
Mhm,
who have adopted one way or another. And I agree
mhm,
with you. There really is that support as you are preparing to adopt embryos and as you are doing it. But it's so crazy because, with me, I had 3 or 4 transfers and all of them failed. And it's like they fail, you get that negative pregnancy test, and then what? What are you
mhm,
supposed to do? You just pick up and move on the next day. It's very
mhm,
difficult, and you're on hormones, and there's all this stuff,
mhm.
and there's so much, and you're struggling with the fact that these were embryos that you loved, that you adopted, but you don't know.
Yeah.
And anyways, this is not my story, but I think that's really amazing that that's what you're doing, and I'm very
Mhm,
excited to see that to just blossom.
mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited just to offer support, because I feel like once people see that there is support when they go through an adoption process, I think adoption would also be more appealing to people, because right now a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't want to raise somebody else's kid. But when you
Mhm.
adopt, that child is yours. And so I think that that's just we just really need to recognize, and more adoption propaganda is needed, because I think a lot of people just don't understand it at all.
I love that adoption propaganda. I love that. We do need that. I think that it's very important to educate on that because I mean, I always
Mhm,
obviously bring this conversation back around somehow to abortion. I mean, that's just the story of my life. But I think
mhm,
that having more information for women who are either
mhm,
pregnant or have embryos and have done IVF is very, very important
mhm.
because they're not. Especially in the IVF industry, through my experience, they're not getting that information. You're not
Yeah.
really being told, okay, well, this is a human being, right? You're being told, well, this is a human being if it implants and you become pregnant and then,
Mhm,
you're going to have this life. But, oh, well, you just don't need to keep paying storage fees for this, for these embryos every single month and things like that. So I
mhm,
think the education piece is going to be very, very important. And we've talked a little bit about, you as a child and then obviously you now in when we have debates about IVF, and I just think this is in general about any family social issue. It could be about, yeah, IVF surrogacy and things like that, third party reproduction. Adults are always the loudest. We're always the ones saying our opinion, and with IVF, it's very much like the desires of the adults that are coming before the humanity of the children. Um, why is it so important that we start listening to the children who actually grew up within these systems?
Yeah, I feel like you've read my last 2 X posts just with, like, that question, because I feel like I've been posting a lot about that recently, that people are writing these articles about IVF or opinion pieces of IVF, and I don't see anywhere of them asking one of these formerly frozen children their thoughts on it. I get to see many big pro-life advocates ask formerly frozen embryo's opinion of it. And I'm not just saying ask me. There are thousands of them out there just from Nightlight alone. And Nightlight's not the only one doing embryo adoption. And so you have plenty of families and people to go talk to. And it doesn't just have to be me. I just might be the loudest because this is kind of my niche and just also what I'm doing as a career. But they have the opportunity to ask. And, I just also see, a lot of pro life advocates say, like, I wasn't actually adopted, or I've had people say a lot of crazy things to me. Um, and so I think, like, the conversation around IVF, we really need to tread lightly around it because there are a lot of children, like that story that's been circulating on the internet too, of that couple, I think on the East Coast, that their embryos got swapped and they ended up with a child of a different race than
Mhm.
them. That child is going to grow up and read these headlines and these articles and these tweets saying, like, oh, that child deserved to be with their biological family. And it's like, she doesn't need to read that when she grows up. There are real children involved, real lives at stake, and real people involved in these situations that don't need some uneducated people chiming in with their opinion, because that's hurtful. And
Yeah.
I really stand for the child. I always stand for the child. I don't stand for the opinions of adults. You can have your opinion, but how does this affect the child?
Yeah.
That's like my number one rule. That's what I compare everything to when I'm debating things. And it's disheartening to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have to start putting the needs of children, even as embryos, ahead of our own as adults. And I think that that's one of the biggest critiques I have of our culture is that we don't. We put our needs above the needs of children many times, and we don't consider that. You're right. These are human beings. These are children that have real lived experiences and things like
Mhm.
that. And it's also so important too. I mean, I've obviously I've gotten pushback from the pro-life movement about embryo adoption. I get it, people have questions, but
Mhm.
there's a big distinction between, it's important to, like you said, tread carefully with just because of how they were created
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they are less human or less desirable. I often say the same thing with we've had moms that let them live and their children are conceived in an affair, right? Or maybe without their consent. And regardless of how a human being comes to be, that does not change their value. So, yes, IVF has some serious issues. That doesn't mean that these embryos that were created that way are any less or should be loved any less or not given a chance. And so I think that's really important. Really quick before I forget, what is your like X handle so that people can follow up with all the stuff that you're posting about regarding, children's rights and kind of their perspective on things?
Yeah, it's just my name at Hannah Strege. It's nothing
Okay.
fancy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Sometimes people have weird stuff, so I love it.
Yeah.
um, but right now too, this is something I've been asked. But there are hundreds of thousands of frozen embryos, if not more, uh, millions actually, probably over a million, held in cryopreservation right now. So,
Mhm.
what is your message to families who m- have just completed their IVF journeys, but
Mm.
still have embryos in storage? What would you say to them? What resources would you point them to?
Yeah, I'd ask them to just really consider placing them for adoption. I've walked with lots of families that have reached out to me about, hey, we have these embryos, we're not ready to part with them. What do we do? And, I'm always going to answer. There's never going to be an answer where I say keep them frozen. There's never going to be an answer where I say donate them or destroy them. That's not me. You're never going to hear me say that. So I'm always going to say place them because I think those children deserve to fulfill their gift of life. And even if that mom that adopts those embryos does not get pregnant, they've left their mark on their world and they fulfilled the gift that God gave them of life in the first place.
Mhm.
And so I think that's just such a beautiful thing. And every child deserves that. Every human life deserves that.
Oh yeah, I would do it
And
all over again too,
that's a
knowing that.
gift.
Yeah, it is. Just giving them a chance. Like I would do it 100% all over again, even knowing the
Mhm.
same outcome because it's the intention behind it. It's saying, hey, we're going to give you a chance versus we're going to donate you to science, or we're going to destroy you and you don't have any
Mhm.
chance at all. And it's such a
Mhm.
stark contrast between the language. I love the language that you use. It's very humanizing and warm and adoption, and versus in the IVF industry, it's very sterile. It's very like, discard. I remember
Mhm.
after our first transfer, there was one embryo that was still kind of growing, but he wasn't really growing as
Mhm.
much. And then he, I say he, but the embryo stopped growing,
Mhm.
and died. And I got a call from the nurse, and the nurse said, "Oh yeah, didn't make it. Just went ahead and discarded it, like trash." And I
Wow.
was shocked at the language used when in that situation. And so I just love that you use such humanizing language. Um,
Mhm.
and you talk about giving them a chance. And that's really what it's all about.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing your perspective and sharing a really vulnerable part of your life. I think that is such a gift to so many people that you would do it all over again. And I think that really just speaks to your character and your love for them. And something that we ended up doing is I encouraged my parents to name all of the 19 siblings that we lost. I don't know if you saw that in the book, but they got annoyed with me because I wanted middle names too. But the whole thing was just like, if you've ever seen Heaven is for Real, when Colton, runs into one of his siblings in heaven and she didn't have a name. And it was just like, whether his experience, I'm not discounting his experience at all, but his story really stuck with me. And I'm like, that must be what heaven's like. Those children that are unnamed, don't have a name. And so I think giving them a name really humanizes the process. And the more people you speak to from infertility clinics, the more you'll understand that it's sometimes just a job to them. And I spoke to an embryologist, oh gosh, last summer, who really doesn't want embryos to be seen as people. Like she's really pushing back against the personhood amendments and conversations because she doesn't want to be charged with manslaughter. That was a really horrible conversation to have because it's
I
like
bet.
you just want your job to be easier.
Yeah.
These are
Yeah.
human lives and they're in frozen tanks. And yes, every job dealing with human life has, its risks, but those are still valuable human lives and they are humans and need to be seen
Yeah.
as people.
It could probably get very easy for an embryologist, I imagine, to very quickly dehumanize the embryos because they're so small, because of
Mhm.
how they came to be, because they talk about them in language like, well, they're, 7 or 3A, or, like the different
Mhm.
grading system that they have in
Mhm.
embryology. And, oh, it's higher quality or lower quality. Like you start to
Mhm.
get away from the humanity of that. And I think that that's really problematic
Mhm.
in our culture, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think that's problematic, but
Yeah.
you were once, I mean, that's kind of, we're both kind of on opposite sides here. I was an adopted mother, you were adopted. You were once, I mean, your parents were told, "Hey, this embryo is this quality." I mean, that was you,
Mhm.
Hannah, and that's just crazy to me.
Mhm.
And I just really, really hope that we can start to see the humanity in embryos very soon, or else we are in big, big trouble. And you talked a little
Yeah.
bit about um, I'm blanking. The personhood
That's okay.
amendment. Sorry. I'm like, today's a Monday.
Mm.
Um, I do want to talk a little bit about policies and how we help policymakers and the medical community, like you were talking about
Mhm.
the embryologist, see frozen embryos not just as like scientific property or backup options, but as people, patients deserving of legal protection. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how we can make that happen?
Yeah, I think anybody can make that happen. I got the opportunity, and this isn't just because I'm the first adopted frozen embryo. I was contacted, my mom and we flew like the next day to Missouri to go testify on this bill that was being passed or spoken about. And I was one of the first people to read my testimony in front of a bunch of senators, and they were kind of blown away that the bill that they were talking about had an actual formerly frozen embryo sitting before them reading. And I think just going and preparing a little speech and saying your opinion about it changes so much. Um, they might walk away, they might get tired of hearing it, but that's our rights as citizens. And I don't live in Missouri. Like, I flew out there because I knew it was happening, and I feel like embryos deserve better.
I
I
love that.
believe that the unborn deserve better, right? And so I think it's just anybody can go say their piece. There were a lot of different people there from all different backgrounds of life, not just embryo adoption. But I think, this is real time happening right now in lots of states across
Yeah.
our nation. And so I think these conversations, we welcome anybody that's willing to learn.
Yeah, I think you have the most powerful perspective of everyone. I mean, I could go and I could, testify in front of, the state senate or whatever. I could testify in front of committees and say, well, I adopted embryos. But the fact that you were one is so powerful. And I hope, and, the Lord has it all planned out, but I hope that other people who have been born from embryo adoption also start to step forward and speak up and just continue to be bold, and that you guys continue to have a platform, because you are
Mhm.
advocating for a group of people, human beings,
Mhm.
that not a lot of people can advocate for in a very effective way like you can. So I think
Mhm.
that's so amazing that you're doing that. You have such a unique perspective, that
Thank
only
you.
you can talk about. So beautiful, and I know that you're changing people's minds, and I know that you're changing hearts, and um hopefully that can continue, and hopefully people can keep softening their hearts to just hear the truth that, yeah, you know what, we all were embryos once. And that's what I always tell people. We were all embryos one time. You just don't remember
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that embryo adoption and just like this whole concept is really the answer. I was telling somebody earlier, it's really the answer to this whole the pro-life movement of my body, my choice, and I can do what I want. It's my body. And it's like, no, these frozen embryos aren't in anybody's body, yet they are alive and their life began at conception. And I went into my next stage of development overnight, and we have pictures to prove it. Um, Without anybody's body, without the woman's body that was in the petri dish. And that was all me. That had nothing to do with the doctors, that had nothing to do with my mom. And so if you're telling me that's not alive, you tell me what it is.
Mhm.
And so I really think it's really the answer moving forward to just really changing hearts and minds. Like,
Yeah.
the freezer doesn't make somebody not human.
I think that's a really good point. I had never thought about it like that before. So I'm gonna store that, because that's a very, very, very good point. It doesn't make us not human. We all had to go through that stage of life at some point in order to get to where we are today. So I
Mhm.
think that that's very powerful. Uh, Kind of moving on to, I mean, my side of things. I share very openly about our embryo adoption journey and fertility and all that stuff. But for
Mhm.
couples who might be listening right now, watching this, who are walking through just the heartbreak of infertility or whatever it is, what hope does your story offer them?
I would hope that they just have hope in general, like I think hope is what makes us be able to move forward. So no matter what the pain or the grief or the situation was, if we don't have hope, we don't really have hope for the future, or like have an idea of what to expect that or what's to come. Because I think just because you might be experiencing loss in this moment, it doesn't mean that God's not going to provide for you tenfold in the next year or 5 years or what have you, right? It's
Mhm.
just not your time now.
Yeah.
um and I think, every negative pregnancy test is just another shot to the heart. And I think that that's just it's there's no words. There's no words. And sitting with people that have lost and um just loved and poured their heart into growing their family, I think that, even if you're not a Christian, but God sees you, God knows your pain, and God still has a plan for you in the future, and
That's so good.
knows where your child is. God knows where your child is. Your child could be in a freezer, your child could be overseas, your child could be in your city. And God knows. God
Yeah.
knows. And we just have to like trust his timing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And something you had said earlier in this interview, and it's a phrase that I use all the time. It's obviously like a snowflake's phrase, but the frozen orphanage, right, is kind of the term for all these embryos who are waiting to be adopted. And I think that that just provides hope as well to
Mhm.
families who there's this innate desire in us women to have children, to be pregnant, to experience that.
Mhm.
And then there's these children, there's these human beings, these little frozen embryos in their frozen orphanage waiting. And I
Yeah.
think that, obviously, like you said, the Lord is going to provide and direct your steps.
Mhm.
And maybe, one family's path is like domestic adoption or international adoption. Maybe another family's path is embryo adoption. But there is hope, and there
Mhm.
are lives literally waiting
Mhm.
to be given a chance. And you are proof of that,
Mhm.
which is so beautiful. I love it.
Thank you.
Um, you had talked about your nonprofit, Wonderfully Made Adoption Services International.
Mhm.
How can anyone watching support that? Find your writing, talk about your dad's book a little bit, the name, where they can find it, and just keep up with you and all that you're doing and all of your advocacy work, all the
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a more direct answer right now because things are still up in the air, but my X page, I'll probably be posting the most there. My LinkedIn as well. It's also Hannah like dash Strege. My dad's book can be found on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble. It's called A Snowflake Named Hannah. And we're actually in the process of writing part two. So that's been really fun to work with him on. My dad is a sports writer, retired sports writer, so he got all of the writing expertise, and I have the story which people feel like is worth telling over and over and over again
Yep.
until lives are saved. And so we wrote the book just to kind of pick up where things left off because a lot has happened since the last book came out. And so really, it's just kind of a recollection for us to kind of see, like, hey, this is all the things we've done and what more can we be doing? So,
I love that. Well, I'll be reading it the second it comes out. And I really do encourage everyone, please pick up a copy of A Snowflake Named Hannah. Very amazing book. Very just amazing story about your parents. And maybe I should have them on sometime. They're just wonderful
yeah,
people. And I think that their hearts are huge. So when do you guys know when book two is coming, or that's TBD?
it's TBD for right
God's
now. But
timing.
yeah, now God's timing, and there's just a lot to unpack right now. And so I think
Sure.
that we'll just see where it goes.
Okay. Okay. I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for talking to us or talking to me, and just sharing your story. I think it's very fascinating, obviously. And I think that it's just an encouragement for people to just keep learning about embryo adoption. In the pro life movement, like I said, there's people that agree with it, there's people that don't agree with it, there's people that don't know what to think about it. And
Mhm.
I think we've got to support it. That's my opinion. I don't think there's really any other option that's as redemptive. I always tell people it's the same thing with abortion. When a woman comes to let them live and she says, "Hey, I'm pregnant and I'm considering abortion," we don't start with, "Well, you shouldn't have gotten pregnant in the first place," right? We start with the fact that there already is a life that exists. Did
Mhm.
that life come about maybe in the less than ideal circumstances? Sure, but we deal
Mhm.
with where we start right there. There's a life here. What do we do about it now? It's the same thing with embryo adoption, you guys. Is it less than ideal that lives were, many embryos are created through IVF and then discarded? Yes, absolutely. But what do we do with the lives that already exist? We
Yeah.
have to figure out what's best for them. And in my opinion, and obviously your opinion, that's embryo adoption. So um, please talk about embryo adoption. Please research it. Please get to know about it and really consider that as the most redemptive option to the problems that IVF has created. That's my PSA for everyone. But thank you again. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that I didn't cover?
I don't think so. I think, just a lot of people always ask me my opinions on IVF, I think. And I think people sometimes try to get me caught in some sort of trap.
Mm,
I'm thankful
same.
to IVF because I was created through IVF, but that doesn't mean I agree with how it stands to this day. And I would rather see it end if they don't change certain things about it. So, no freezing, no donor egg and no donor sperm, no ICSI, no discarding of embryos. I think if we're really being seeing these lives as human, we need to be treating them as such. And so we need to be removing the practices that are creating further harm for adult snowflakes or adult embryos as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Well, thank you again for your time and for your story. And you guys, please follow Hannah on X and just keep up, and please read her dad's book. It's really amazing. So thank you again, Hannah. I really appreciate you coming on.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.